The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains of the small apartment in Uzo River, casting golden streaks across the worn wooden floor. Liana Okoye stood before the cracked mirror in her bedroom, studying her reflection with a mixture of pride and frustration. Her skin glowed like polished mahogany, her eyes were bright and sharp, and her figure drew admiring glances wherever she walked. Yet the peeling paint on the walls behind her, the faded bedspread, the single light bulb hanging from a frayed wire, these things filled her with a gnawing dissatisfaction that had only grown sharper with each passing year. "Liana, come and eat before the food gets cold," her mother's voice drifted through the thin walls. Liana smoothed down her dress, one of only 3 she owned that didn't have visible patches or faded colors, and made her way to the small kitchen where Mama Kisi was setting out plates of yam and eggs. The older woman's hands were rough from years of washing clothes for wealthier families, her back slightly bent from carrying loads on her head through the dusty streets of their neighborhood. Despite the hardship etched into every line of her face, Mama Kisi's eyes held a warmth that had never dimmed. "You're staring at yourself in that mirror again," Mama Kisi said without looking up. "Beauty is a gift, my daughter, but it's not a ladder." "Maybe not for you, Mama," Liana replied, settling onto the wooden stool. "But times are different now. Beauty opens doors." Mama Kisi finally looked at her daughter, and something sad flickered in her expression. Doors can lead to many places. Not all of them are safe. Liana said nothing, focusing instead on her food. She had heard these warnings countless times before, these cautionary tales about pride and patience and finding contentment in simple things. But contentment felt like surrender. Every day she watched other girls from wealthier families parade through town in expensive fabrics, their wrists jangling with gold, their futures secure. What had contentment ever given Mama Kisi except calloused hands and a lifetime of struggle? After breakfast, Liana made her way through the narrow streets toward the marketplace. The morning air was already thick with heat and the mingled scents of frying akara, roasting corn, and the perpetual dust that seemed to coat everything in Uzo River. Women called out their wares from wooden stalls, children darted between legs and wheels, and somewhere a radio blared the latest high-life music. "Liana, wait up!" She turned to see Tari Adebayo jogging toward her, his work shirt already stained with engine grease despite the early hour. His smile was wide and genuine, the kind of smile that had once made her heart flutter before she'd begun measuring it against the smiles of wealthier men. "I thought I might walk with you," Tari said, slightly breathless, "unless you're too busy for a poor mechanic." "Don't start with that again," Liana said, but she slowed her pace to match his. "How's the workshop?" "We're getting there." Tari's eyes lit up the way they always did when he talked about his dreams. "Mr. Imika says if I save enough for the equipment, he'll help me get a loan for the building. In 2, maybe 3 years, I could have my own place. A real workshop with my name on it. Tari's auto repair and—" "3 years," Liana interrupted. "That's a long time, Tari. Good things take time." He reached for her hand and she let him take it, though her fingers remained limp in his grip. "I know it's not fast, but it's solid. It's real. And when I have the workshop running, making real money, I want to marry you, Liana. I want to build a life with you." There it was again. That word. Build. As if life were something you constructed brick by patient brick, instead of seizing it with both hands when opportunity presented itself. Tari was kind, certainly, hard-working, without question. But kindness and hard work were common as dirt in Uzo River, and they rarely lifted anyone above the struggle. "That's sweet, Tari," she said, extracting her hand on the pretense of adjusting her bag. "But 3 years is a long time to wait for maybes." His smile faltered. "It's not a maybe. I'm going to make it happen." I'm sure you will. She kept her tone light, non-committal. I have to go. I'm meeting Kioma at the market. Liana, he started, but she was already moving away, weaving between the morning shoppers with practiced ease. She didn't actually have plans to meet Kioma. That was a convenient excuse, one she'd used before when Tari's earnest declarations of future plans became too suffocating. Instead, she wandered through the market, her eyes constantly drawn to the things she couldn't afford, the imported fabrics in brilliant colors, the jewelry that caught the light, the leather handbags hanging in the boutique windows, priced at more than Mama Casey earned in a month. Admiring the merchandise, Liana turned to find an older woman watching her, amusement dancing in her eyes. The woman wore expensive traditional attire, her wrapper and blouse made of the finest Dutch wax print, and gold gleamed at her throat and wrists. Just looking, Liana said, suddenly self-conscious of her own simple dress. Looking is how it starts. The woman moved closer, her perfume expensive and subtle. But a girl like you shouldn't just look. You should have these things. That would require money I don't have. Money isn't always about what you have now, my dear. It's about understanding your worth. The woman's gaze traveled over Liana appraisingly. You're striking, truly beautiful. That's a resource if you know how to use it properly. Something in Liana both bristled at and thrilled to these words. What do you mean? I mean that beauty like yours catches important eyes, and important eyes belong to important men who can change your circumstances overnight. The woman smiled. There's a fundraiser tomorrow evening at the community center. The governor will be there with several prominent business people. You should come. Wear something that shows you understand your value. I don't have an invitation. You're invited now. My name is Mrs. Udoka. Tell them at the door that you're my guest. She pressed a card into Liana's hand. Don't waste your youth in the marketplace, dear girl. Some of us see your potential even if you're not sure you see it yourself. Mrs. Udoka glided away before Liana could respond, leaving her standing amid the bustle of the market with a business card in her hand and a dangerous spark of possibility igniting in her chest. That evening, Liana sat on the edge of her bed, turning Mrs. Udoka's card over and over in her fingers. Mama Kessie was preparing dinner in the kitchen, humming an old hymn, and the sound should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like a trap slowly closing, a preview of the life stretching ahead if she didn't act. She would wake each morning in this cramped apartment. She would walk these same dusty streets. She would watch other women flash their wealth while she patched her clothes and counted pennies. And one day she would become Mama Casey, worn down, bent over, satisfied with survival when she could have had so much more. I'm going to a fundraiser tomorrow night, Liana announced at dinner. Mama Casey looked up from her plate. A fundraiser? Who invited you? A woman I met at the market, Mrs. Udoka. She said I should come, that there will be important people there. Important people. Mama Casey set down her fork, her expression growing serious. Liana, these important people you keep chasing, what do you think they want in return for their attention? Maybe they just want to help someone with potential. And maybe the river runs upstream. Mama Casey shook her head. Daughter, I've watched you these past months. I see how you look at Tari like he's not enough. I see how you stare at expensive things with hunger in your eyes. But let me tell you something. Gold can mask rot. The shiniest apple might be crawling with worms inside. You always say things like that, Liana said, unable to keep the edge from her voice. Stay small. Don't reach. Be grateful for scraps. But I want more than this, Mama. I want to live, not just survive. And I want you to live with your soul intact. Mama Casey reached across the table, gripping Liana's hand with surprising strength. There are many kinds of poverty, child. The kind that empties your pocket is hard, yes. But the kind that empties your spirit, that's the poverty you never recover from. Liana pulled her hand away. I'm going to the fundraiser. I need to borrow your good wrapper. The disappointment in her mother's eyes was palpable, but Mama Kessie said nothing more. She simply rose and went to her room, returning with her best wrapper, the one she wore to church and weddings, the one she'd somehow kept pristine despite years of careful wear. She handed it to Liana without a word. Thank you, Mama, Liana whispered. I pray you know what you're thanking me for, Mama Casey replied. The following evening, Liana stood before the community center, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd spent hours getting ready, twisting her hair into an elegant updo, applying her makeup with meticulous care, wrapping herself in Mama Casey's best fabric over a fitted blouse that accentuated her figure. When she'd checked the mirror, she'd seen someone transformed, not the girl from the shabby apartment, but someone who could belong in rooms with crystal chandeliers and champagne glasses. Name? The man at the door barely looked at her. I'm with Mrs. Udoka, Liana said, trying to sound confident. He checked his list, then nodded curtly. Go in. The interior of the community center had been transformed. White tablecloths covered long tables laden with food Liana had only seen in magazines. Crystal glasses caught the light from rented chandeliers. Men in expensive agbadas and women in designer fabrics moved through the space with the casual confidence of people who never worried about where their next meal would come from. Liana felt simultaneously invisible and exposed, like she was wearing a costume that might slip at any moment. She accepted a glass of wine from a passing waiter and moved along the periphery, trying to look purposeful rather than lost. You came. Mrs. Udoka materialized beside her, resplendent in emerald green. Good. Come with me. There's someone you should meet. Before Liana could protest, Mrs. Udoka was guiding her through the crowd with a firm hand on her elbow. They wove between clusters of conversation until they reached a group of men holding court near the center of the room. And at the heart of that group stood a man who commanded attention without seeming to try. Governor Nkem Obiora was tall and imposing, his traditional attire clearly custom-made and expensive. His face was broad and handsome, his beard precisely trimmed, and when he laughed at something one of the other men said, the sound was rich and powerful. But it was his eyes that caught Liana, dark and penetrating, the kind of eyes that seemed to see through pretense and evaluate worth in a single glance. Governor, may I introduce a young friend of mine, Mrs. Udoka said smoothly. This is Liana Okoye. The governor's gaze shifted to Liana, and she felt the full weight of his attention. His eyes traveled over her face, taking in her features with an assessment that was both flattering and slightly unsettling. Liana Okoye, he repeated, as if tasting her name. A beautiful name for a beautiful woman. Tell me, Liana, what brings you to this gathering? Mrs. Udoka invited me, Liana managed, acutely aware of the other men's eyes on her now. I wanted to support the cause. And what cause is that? There was amusement in his voice. She realized with embarrassment that she had no idea what charity the fundraiser was for. Education, she guessed. Governor Obiora smiled, and something about that smile made her pulse quicken. Close enough. Healthcare for rural communities, but education is always worthy. Tell me, do you work? I help my mother, Liana said, then immediately regretted how small it sounded. Family devotion. That's admirable. He stepped closer and Liana caught the scent of his cologne, something expensive and complex. Beauty and virtue. A rare combination in these times. You should enjoy yourself this evening, Liana. Try the food, network. Who knows what opportunities might arise for a young woman of your obvious qualities? With that, he turned back to his conversation, effectively dismissing her. But Liana didn't feel dismissed. She felt seen. For the first time in her life, someone powerful had looked at her and recognized her potential, not as Mama Kessie's daughter or Tari's girlfriend, but as something separate and valuable in her own right. The evening unfolded like a dream. Mrs. Udoka introduced her to other women who moved in wealthy circles, who spoke casually about vacation homes and imported cars. Liana nodded and smiled, asking questions that revealed her interest without exposing her ignorance. And throughout it all, she felt Governor Obiora's eyes on her, tracking her movements across the room with the focus of a predator observing promising prey. When the fundraiser was winding down, a young man in an expensive suit approached her. "Miss Okoye, Governor Obiora requests your company for a moment before you leave." Liana's heart leaped. She followed the young man to a quieter corner where the governor stood, now without his entourage. "I hope you enjoyed yourself tonight," he said. "Very much. Thank you." "I'd like to see you again, Liana. Perhaps dinner? I think you're someone worth knowing better." He produced a business card from his pocket. "This is my personal number. Call me tomorrow." Liana took the card with trembling fingers. "I will." "Good." He smiled again, and this time it seemed warmer, more genuine. "Don't keep me waiting too long. A woman like you shouldn't waste time in obscurity." Liana floated home that night, the card burning like a talisman in her purse. The shabby streets of Uzo River seemed temporary now, a place she was already beginning to leave behind. When she entered the apartment, Mama Kisi was still awake, sitting in her worn armchair with a Bible open in her lap. "Did you meet your important people?" her mother asked quietly. "I met the governor," Liana said, unable to keep the triumph from her voice. "Governor Obiora himself. He wants to see me again. He gave me his personal number." Mama Casey closed her Bible slowly. "And what do you think a governor wants with a girl from Uzo River? Maybe he sees what I have to offer. Maybe he recognizes potential when he sees it. Maybe." Mama Kessie's voice was heavy with unspoken warnings. "Or maybe he sees something easy to take. These powerful men, Liana, they collect beautiful things like other people collect shells on the beach. And when they're done admiring them, they leave them behind to be crushed underfoot. You don't know that. You don't know him. I know men. I know power. And I know my daughter is walking towards something that scares me more than any poverty ever could." But Liana wasn't listening anymore. She was already imagining the life that was opening before her, the clothes she would wear, the places she would go, the envy in the eyes of girls who'd once looked down on her. Governor Obiora had seen her. He had chosen her from all the women in that room. Surely that meant something. Surely that meant everything was about to change. She went to bed that night with his business card on her nightstand, never once considering that change could cut in more than one direction, or that some transformations were less like butterflies emerging from cocoons, and more like slow drowning in honey, sweet and beautiful until you realized you couldn't breathe anymore. Liana waited exactly 24 hours before calling the number on Governor Obiora's card. She'd wanted to call immediately, but some instinct warned her not to appear too eager. When she finally dialed, her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped the phone. Governor Obiora's line. A woman's voice, professional and cool. "This is Liana Okoye. The governor asked me to call." There was a pause, the rustle of papers. One moment. "Please." The hold music was classical, something foreign and sophisticated that made Liana feel even more out of her depth. Then the line clicked. "Liana?" His voice was warm, pleased. "I was beginning to think you'd changed your mind." "I wanted to give you time," she said, then worried that sounded presumptuous. I know you're busy." "Never too busy for something beautiful." There was that smile in his voice again. "Are you free this Saturday evening? I'd like to take you to dinner. Somewhere worthy of you. Somewhere worthy of her." The words wrapped around Liana like silk. "I'm free." "Excellent. I'll send a car for you at 7. Wear something that makes you feel powerful." The call ended, and Liana stood frozen in her small bedroom, reality crashing over her in waves. She had nothing to wear to the kind of restaurant a governor would choose, nothing even close. Panic clawed at her throat until she remembered her friend Kioma, whose cousin worked at a boutique in the next town. By Saturday evening, Liana had borrowed enough money to buy a dress that would have horrified Mama Kessie with its price tag, a form-fitting number in deep burgundy that transformed her into someone else entirely. She told her mother she was having dinner with friends, unable to bear another lecture about dangerous men and hollow promises. When the black car pulled up outside their building, Liana's heart hammered. The driver, wearing a crisp uniform, opened the door for her without a word. Inside, the leather seats were soft as butter, and the air conditioning was so cold she shivered. They drove for nearly an hour, leaving Ouzo River behind and entering a part of the city Liana had only seen in photographs. The restaurant was called Azure, perched on the top floor of a gleaming building with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. Governor Obiora was waiting at a private table, and when he saw her, he stood with a smile that made her feel like the only woman in the world. "You're stunning," he said simply, pulling out her chair. The menu had no prices, which Liana had heard meant they were too expensive to matter. She ordered what the governor recommended, watching him across the candlelight as he spoke about his work, his vision for the state, his frustrations with bureaucracy and small-minded politicians who couldn't see beyond the next election. "You must think I'm boring you with all this talk of governance," he said eventually, refilling her wine glass. "Not at all. I think it's fascinating." And she did, though she understood perhaps half of what he was saying. What fascinated her more was the way he included her in his thoughts, asked her opinions, listened when she spoke as if her words had weight. "Tell me about yourself, Liana. What do you want from life?" The question caught her off guard. "I want more than what I have," she said honestly. "I want to matter. I want to live in a way that means something." "And what does that look like to you?" "I don't know exactly, but I know it's not staying in the same place, watching life happen to other people while I wait for my turn." Obiora leaned back, studying her with those penetrating eyes. "You're ambitious. I like that. Too many young women today are content to be decorative. But you have fire. That's rare. That's valuable." The dinner stretched into hours. The food was extraordinary, each course a revelation, but Liana barely tasted it. She was drunk on attention, on possibility, on the intoxicating sensation of being chosen by someone who could have anyone. When the driver took her home, Obiora walked her to her door despite her protests about the neighborhood. "I want to see you again," he said. "Many times. I think you could be important to me, Liana." "I'd like that," she whispered. He kissed her hand, his lips warm against her skin, and then he was gone, leaving her standing in the dim hallway that suddenly felt even shabbier than before. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Obiora called her almost daily. He sent his driver to bring her to elegant lunches, evening events, gallery openings where she rubbed shoulders with people whose names she'd only read in newspapers. He bought her clothes, not directly at first, but through Mrs. Udoka, who would appear with packages and say they were gifts from friends who wanted to see her succeed. Liana stopped going to the market as frequently. She stopped answering Tari's calls. When they did cross paths on the street, she saw the hurt in his eyes and felt a twinge of guilt that she quickly suppressed. Tari represented everything she was leaving behind: the small dreams, the patient waiting, the humble acceptance of limitations. "You've changed," Mama Kessie said one evening, watching Liana apply expensive makeup before another outing. "I've grown," Liana corrected. "There's a difference between growing and becoming someone else entirely." Her mother's voice was quiet, resigned. "When do I get to meet this governor of yours?" "Soon, Mama. He's very busy. But not too busy to buy you expensive things and take you out every night. He cares about me. Does he?" Mama Kessie moved closer, her worn hands gentle on Liana's shoulders. "Child, men like that don't care. They possess. There's a difference. You're wrong about him. You don't know him like I do." "I pray to God I am wrong." Mama Kessie's eyes glistened. "I pray every night that I'm just a frightened old woman who doesn't understand modern ways. But Liana, if I'm right, if something feels wrong, promise me you'll come home. Promise me you'll remember that this door is always open." "Nothing's going to feel wrong, Mama. Everything is finally right." But that very evening, something did shift. Obiora took her to his private residence for the first time, not the governor's mansion where official functions were held, but a sprawling estate in Easy Glen, surrounded by high walls and whispering trees. The house was enormous, cold despite the elegant furnishings, and eerily quiet. "Where's your staff?" Liana asked, noticing the emptiness. "I gave them the evening off. I wanted to be alone with you." He poured them both whiskey from a crystal decanter. "We need to talk about the future, Liana." Her pulse quickened. "What about the future?" "I think you know how I feel about you, how serious I am." He sat beside her on the leather sofa, his hand finding hers. "I want you in my life permanently. I want to marry you." The words should have sent her soaring. Instead, something cold trickled down her spine. "That's sudden. Is it?" "We've spent nearly every day together for 2 months. I know what I want, and I think you do too." His grip on her hand tightened slightly. "Unless I've misread this. Unless you've just been enjoying the dinners and the clothes and the attention without any real investment." "No," Liana said quickly. "No, I care about you, I do. Marriage is serious. Which is exactly why I'm proposing it. I don't play games, Liana. When I commit to something, I commit completely. The question is whether you're ready to do the same." There was an edge to his voice now, something that made the vast house feel even colder. Liana thought about Mama Kessie's warnings, about the promises she'd made to herself about being careful. But she also thought about returning to that cramped apartment, to a life of washing other people's clothes and counting pennies, to watching Tari slowly build a future that would always be modest at best. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes, I'll marry you." Obiora's smile returned, warm and satisfied. "You've made me very happy. We'll announce it properly, have an engagement party. You'll need to move in here, of course. Start getting familiar with being the governor's wife." "What about my mother?" "We'll make sure she's taken care of. You'll be able to help her in ways you never could before. Isn't that what you wanted? To elevate not just yourself, but your family." It was exactly what she'd wanted. So why did it feel like she'd just signed something without reading the terms? The engagement party was held 3 weeks later, a glittering affair that made the fundraiser look modest by comparison. Important politicians flew in from the capital. Business leaders brought expensive gifts. Liana wore a designer gown that cost more than Mama Kessie earned in a year, and everywhere she turned, people congratulated her, called her lucky, whispered about what a catch the governor was. Tari showed up uninvited. Liana was accepting champagne from a waiter when she saw him standing at the edge of the crowd, still in his work clothes, looking lost and desperate among the formally dressed guests. Her stomach dropped. "Excuse me," she murmured to the group she'd been chatting with, and moved quickly toward Tari before he could make a scene. "What are you doing here?" she hissed. "I had to see you. I had to hear from your own mouth that this is real." His eyes were red-rimmed, his voice rough. "Liana, please, you can't marry him. You don't love him. You don't know what I feel. I know you. I've known you since we were children. This isn't you. This isn't the girl I fell in love with. Maybe that girl grew up. Maybe she realized that love doesn't pay bills or build futures." Tari flinched as if she'd struck him. "So, that's all I was to you. A poor mechanic not worth your time." "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." His voice cracked. "I would have given you everything, Liana. Maybe not mansions and fancy parties, but I would have given you something real, something that wouldn't rot away." "What are you talking about?" "There are stories about him, about Governor Obiora. Bad things. People who get close to him and—" "Stop." Liana's voice was sharp, cold. "Stop embarrassing yourself and me. Those are just rumors from jealous people who can't stand to see someone successful." "Liana, please." "I think you should leave, young man." They both turned to find Obiora standing there, his face calm but his eyes hard as stones. 2 security guards flanked him. "This is a private event," Obiora continued smoothly, "for invited guests only. I'm not leaving until Liana tells me herself that this is what she wants," Tari said, standing his ground despite the fear evident in his trembling hands. Obiora looked at Liana expectantly. The moment stretched out, heavy with the weight of irreversible choices. Liana thought about Tari's dreams of his workshop, his earnest promises, his simple offer of building something together. And then she looked at Obiora, at the power he represented, at the life of luxury and importance waiting for her. "This is what I want," she said clearly. "I want to marry Governor Obiora. I want the life he can give me. And I want you to leave, Tari. I want you to forget about me and move on." The pain that washed over Tari's face was so raw, so complete, that Liana almost reached for him, almost apologized, almost took it all back. "You deserve each other," Tari said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. He looked at Obiora with something like pity. "You've won yourself a beautiful prize, Governor. I hope you enjoy her while she still remembers how to be human." He turned and walked away, his shoulders bent as if carrying an impossible weight. Liana watched him go, and somewhere deep in her chest, something vital seemed to crack. "Ignore him," Obiora said, his hand firm on her lower back. "Jealousy makes people say terrible things. Come. There are important people who want to meet you." But as she let him guide her back into the glittering crowd, Liana couldn't shake the image of Tari's face or the echo of his warning about rot. The champagne suddenly tasted bitter on her tongue. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of preparations. Liana moved into a guest suite at the Obiora estate, ostensibly to begin adjusting to her new home. The house revealed itself slowly, vast and echoing, full of locked doors and rooms the staff whispered about when they thought she couldn't hear. "Why is the West Wing always closed?" she asked Obiora one evening over dinner. "Renovations," he said smoothly. "Nothing that concerns you." "But I'll be living here. Shouldn't I know about renovations to my own home?" His eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Once we're married, there will be time for you to know everything. For now, focus on the wedding. Focus on becoming worthy of being my wife." Worthy. The word stung, but Liana swallowed her pride. She'd come too far to question things now. The wedding dress hung in her closet, a creation of silk and lace that cost more than Mama Kesey's entire apartment. Invitations had been sent to everyone important in the state. There was no graceful way to back out now, even if she'd wanted to. But at night, alone in the guest suite, she sometimes heard things. Footsteps in empty corridors, whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves. And once, passing by the locked west wing, she'd smelled something foul beneath the heavy incense that always burned in that hallway, something rotten and wrong that made her stomach turn. "It's just an old house," she told herself. "Old houses have strange smells." The wedding day arrived with perfect weather, sunny and warm, with just enough breeze to keep the heat bearable. The ceremony was held in the estate's gardens, transformed into something from a fairy tale, with thousands of white flowers and golden accents everywhere. Important people filled the seats, cameras flashed, a traditional band played. Mama Casey sat in the front row, her face composed but her eyes sad. She'd tried one last time the night before. "It's not too late," she'd whispered, holding Liana's hands. "If something feels wrong, we can leave right now. I don't care about the embarrassment or the gossip. I just want my daughter safe. I'm going to be fine, Mama. Better than fine. I'm going to be the governor's wife." "That's what I'm afraid of," Mama Casey had replied. Now, standing at the altar beside Obiora, Liana felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on her. The priest spoke about commitment and unity and the sacred bonds of marriage. Obiora's responses were clear and confident. When it was Liana's turn to speak, her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. "I do." The words felt final in a way she hadn't anticipated, not like opening a door to a new life, but like hearing a lock click shut behind her. The reception was even more extravagant than the engagement party. Food and drink flowed endlessly. People danced and laughed and toasted the happy couple. Obiora held Liana close during their first dance, his hand possessive on her waist, his smile triumphant. "You're mine now," he whispered in her ear. "Completely mine." It should have sounded romantic. Instead, it sounded like a warning. As the evening wore on and the guests grew drunker and louder, Liana slipped away to catch her breath. She found herself in one of the estate's many sitting rooms, staring at her reflection in an ornate mirror. The woman looking back was radiant in her wedding dress, dripping with borrowed jewelry, every inch the governor's wife. But her eyes held a fear she'd been ignoring for weeks. Having second thoughts, Liana spun to find an elderly man in the doorway, one of Obiora's political associates whose name she couldn't remember. "Just needed some air," she said. "Understandable. It's a lot to take in." He moved closer, and she noticed his hands were shaking slightly. "You seem like a nice girl." "Too nice for all this." "I'm not sure what you mean." He looked around as if checking for listeners, then spoke quickly, urgently. "There are things about the governor that people don't talk about, things that have happened to the women in his life before you. If you're smart, you'll find a way out while Father Okafor." Obiora's voice cut through the room like a blade. He stood in the doorway, his smile pleasant, but his eyes deadly cold. "I believe your wife is looking for you. Something about leaving soon." The old man's face went pale. He nodded quickly, brushed past Obiora, and disappeared down the hallway. "What was that about?" Liana asked. "Nothing important. An old man who drinks too much and tells stories." Obiora extended his hand. "Come, it's time for us to retire. The guests can celebrate without us." Liana took his hand because refusing seemed impossible now. She was his wife. This was her wedding night. This was everything she'd wanted. So why did it feel like she was being led to an execution? The bridal suite had been prepared with care, candles, rose petals, champagne chilling in a bucket. But the romantic atmosphere did nothing to ease the dread pooling in Liana's stomach. "You look frightened," Obiora observed, removing his jacket. "I'm just nervous. It's been a long day." "There's nothing to be nervous about." He approached her slowly. "You're where you belong now, with me, in this house. This is your life now, Liana. No more running, no more choices to make, just acceptance." And as his arms closed around her, Liana realized with sudden awful clarity that Tari had been right. She'd won herself a beautiful prison. The only question now was what price she would ultimately pay for the key. The first week of marriage passed like a fever dream. Obiora was attentive in public, introducing Liana to the endless stream of visitors who came to offer congratulations and curry favor. She smiled until her face ached, memorized names and titles, played the role of the gracious governor's wife with increasing skill. But at night, when they retired to the private quarters, something shifted in him. A coldness that settled over his features like frost, a distance in his eyes that made her feel utterly alone despite sharing his bed. "You're learning well," he told her one evening, his tone approving but clinical, as if praising a performing animal. "Another few months and you'll be indispensable to my image." Liana tried to tell herself this was normal, that powerful men were simply different, that love would grow with time, but the locked doors throughout the estate whispered otherwise. The staff's averted eyes told a different story, and the smell, that persistent rot beneath layers of incense, seemed to grow stronger each day. On the 8th night of their marriage, Liana woke to find Obiora's side of the bed empty. The digital clock read 3:17 in the morning. She lay still for a moment, listening to the house settle and creak around her. Then she heard it, footsteps above her head, slow and dragging, as if someone were injured. Her heart hammering, Liana slipped from bed and followed the sound. The hallway outside their suite was lit by dim wall sconces that cast more shadows than light. She climbed the servants' staircase she'd been told never to use, her bare feet silent on the worn steps. The dragging footsteps continued overhead, leading her toward the sealed west wing. The door to the west wing stood slightly ajar. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to return to bed and pretend she'd never woken. But curiosity, that same hunger for knowing, for reaching beyond her limitations that had driven her into Obiora's arms, propelled her forward. She pushed the door open and stepped into darkness, thick with the smell of decay. The hallway was lined with portraits of women, beautiful women, all young, all dressed in bridal attire. Liana's breath caught as she moved closer to examine them. Beneath each painting was a small brass plate with a name and dates. The dates all followed the same pattern, marriage years that spanned only months, sometimes just weeks, before ending abruptly. Adeze Obiora, 2019-2019. Ngozi Obiora, 2020-2020. Chiamaka Obiora, 2021-2022. Liana's blood turned to ice. These weren't distant relatives or historical curiosities. These were wives, his wives, and they'd all disappeared within their first year of marriage. "You shouldn't be here." Liana spun to find a young woman standing in the shadows, one of the house staff she'd seen but never spoken to. The girl's eyes were wide with fear. "Who are they?" Liana whispered, gesturing to the portraits. "Please, madam, go back to your room. Forget you saw this." "I can't forget this. Tell me what happened to them." The girl's hands twisted in her apron. "They're gone. That's all anyone knows. They married the governor and then they disappeared. Some say they ran away. Others say—" She broke off, shaking her head violently. "Please, I've said too much already. If he finds out I spoke to you—" "If he finds out you spoke about what?" The voice came from behind Liana, and she knew without turning that Obiora stood there. The servant girl made a small, frightened sound and fled down the hallway, her footsteps echoing in the darkness. Liana forced herself to turn around. Obiora stood at the threshold, wearing only trousers, his chest bare. Even in the dim light she could see that something was wrong with him. His skin had an unnatural pallor, and he moved with a stiffness that didn't match the fluid grace he usually displayed. "I asked you a question, Liana." "If she spoke about what? About them?" Liana gestured to the portraits, trying to keep her voice steady. "Your previous wives. Why didn't you tell me you'd been married before? Because it wasn't relevant. Wasn't relevant. You had multiple wives who all disappeared. They left. Women are fickle creatures. They wanted luxury until they had it. Then they grew bored and ran back to whatever common lives they'd come from. That's not what the dates suggest. That's not what people are whispering about. Obiora's expression hardened. What people say in whispers is conspiracy and gossip. You should know better than to listen to servants' tales. Then tell me the truth. Tell me what really happened to them. For a long moment he simply stared at her, and in that silence Liana felt the full weight of her mistake crashing down. She'd married a stranger. She'd been so blinded by wealth and status that she'd never asked the right questions, never demanded real answers. And now she was alone in a locked wing with a man whose eyes held no warmth, no humanity, just a cold assessment of a problem to be solved. "Come with me," he said finally. "I'll show you the truth. Isn't that what you want?" Everything in Liana screamed to refuse, to run, to get as far from him as possible. But pride and fear warred within her. If she ran now, where would she go? And what if she was wrong? What if she was letting paranoia twist innocent explanations into nightmare scenarios? She followed him. Obiora led her deeper into the west wing, past empty rooms draped in dust covers, past windows that looked out on gardens turned wild with neglect. They stopped before a heavy wooden door bound with iron reinforcements that seemed excessive for any normal room. "This is my private chamber," Obiora said, producing a key from his pocket. "No one is allowed entry except when I give explicit permission. Do you understand how significant it is that I'm bringing you here?" Liana nodded, unable to speak past the fear lodging in her throat. The door swung open, revealing a room that looked like it belonged to another century. Heavy curtains blocked any natural light. Candles burned in iron sconces, casting dancing shadows on walls lined with strange symbols painted in what looked disturbingly like dried blood. In the center of the room stood an enormous bed, and beside it a table covered with bottles, jars, and instruments that made Liana's skin crawl. But it was the smell that hit her hardest, that rot she'd been detecting throughout the house, now so strong it made her gag. "I'm going to tell you something, Liana, and you're going to listen carefully." Obiora closed the door behind them, the lock clicking with terrible finality. 20 years ago, I should have died. There was an accident, a bad one. My body was destroyed beyond what modern medicine could repair. But I had resources, connections to people who practice older forms of healing. They saved me, but salvation came with conditions. What kind of conditions? The kind that require regular maintenance? He began unbuttoning his shirt, and Liana wanted to look away but found herself frozen. "The ritual that keeps me alive needs to be renewed. It needs tending." He turned his back to her and removed his shirt completely. Liana's scream died in her throat, strangled by pure horror. Obiora's back was a nightmare of necrotic flesh, a wound the size of a dinner plate stretched between his shoulder blades, the edges black and weeping. But worse than the wound itself was what inhabited it. Pale larvae squirmed in the rotten tissue, and the stench of decay rolled off him in waves that made Liana's eyes water. What is that?" she managed to whisper. "The price of power." He spoke calmly, as if discussing the weather. "The ritual keeps me alive, keeps me strong, keeps me in this position of authority. But the wound never heals. It needs to be cleaned, maintained. And it can't be done by just anyone. It requires someone bound to me, someone who has taken my name and shares my fate through marriage." The full horror of it crashed over Liana. "The other wives. You made them." "I gave them a choice. Serve me in this way and live in luxury, or refuse and face the consequences. Most served for a while. But the human spirit is weak. They all broke eventually, tried to escape, tried to expose me, and people who threaten my position tend to disappear. You killed them. I protected what's mine." He turned to face her, his eyes as dead as the flesh on his back. "And now you understand your real purpose here, Liana. You're not my wife, you're my maintenance. Every night you'll clean this wound, you'll remove the larvae that feed on the corruption. You'll apply the sacred oils and speak the words that keep the rot from spreading. And you'll do this in silence, telling no one, or you'll join the gallery of portraits in the hallway." Liana backed toward the door, her hands shaking. "I won't do it. I'll go to the police, I'll tell everyone." "Tell them what?" Obiora smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing she'd ever seen. "That the governor has a magic wound. That he's kept alive by rituals. They'll think you're insane. I've built my reputation carefully, Liana. I'm respected, powerful, connected to everyone who matters. You're just a girl from Uzo River who married above her station. Who do you think they'll believe? Someone will listen. Someone will... No one will listen. No one will help you. You belong to me now by law, by marriage, by the contracts you signed without reading carefully enough. The only question is whether you accept your role gracefully or whether we do this the hard way." He moved toward a wooden chest in the corner and removed items that made Liana's stomach turn. A curved blade, a bowl, bottles of thick oil that smelled of strange herbs. "The first cleaning must happen tonight," he continued. "The wound is particularly inflamed because I've been unable to maintain it properly while courting you. You'll use the blade to scrape away the dead tissue. The larvae must be removed carefully. They bite, but their venom only causes temporary paralysis, not death. Then you'll apply the oil and recite the incantation. I'll teach you the words." "I can't," Liana sobbed. "Please, I can't do this." "You will." His voice dropped to something cold and absolute. "Because if you refuse, I'll make sure your mother suffers. I know where she lives, Liana. I know she's alone in that shabby apartment. It would be so easy for her to have an accident. A fire, perhaps, or a break-in gone wrong. These things happen in poor neighborhoods." The threat against Mama Kessie cut through Liana's paralysis like a knife. "You wouldn't? Test me and find out." He held out the curved blade. "Now come here. It's time for your first lesson in being the governor's wife." Liana's legs moved without conscious thought, carrying her toward this monster she'd married. Tears streamed down her face as she took the blade with trembling hands. Obiora turned his back to her again, presenting the rotting wound with casual expectation. "Begin with the center," he instructed. "Scrape firmly, but not deep enough to cause bleeding. The dead tissue should come away in strips." The blade touched decay, and Liana retched, bile rising in her throat. The larvae writhed more actively at the disturbance. And some fell away onto the floor, where they continued moving with blind persistence. "Continue," Obiora commanded. Liana continued because she had no choice, because he'd trapped her perfectly, using her own ambition against her, turning her desire for a better life into a cage she'd locked herself inside. The minutes stretched into an eternity of horror as she scraped and cleaned and tried not to think about what she was doing, tried not to imagine the other women who'd stood in this exact spot before her, performing this exact ritual until they'd broken. When it was finally over, Liana collapsed in the corner, hugging her knees, her hands still shaking despite being washed. Obiora dressed himself, his movements smooth now, almost graceful, as if the cleaning had restored something vital. "You did well for your first time," he said. "It gets easier. After a few weeks, you barely think about it." "I'll never stop thinking about it," Liana whispered. "We'll see." He opened the door. "Go back to our room. Clean yourself up. We have a breakfast meeting with the ministers tomorrow morning, and I need you presentable. You'll smile and play the devoted wife, and no one will ever know what happens in this room. Do you understand?" Liana nodded, because nodding was all she had left. "Good. I'll join you shortly." He paused at the doorway. "And Liana, welcome to the family. Your portrait will hang with the others one day, but I hope it won't be soon. You're particularly beautiful, and I'd like to enjoy you for a while." He left her there, sitting in the corner of that nightmarish room, surrounded by the tools of her new reality. The candles guttered in their sconces, casting shadows that looked like reaching hands. And somewhere in the house, Liana imagined she could hear the whispers of all the women who'd come before her, warning her about a fate she'd already sealed. She thought about Tari's face when she'd rejected him, about Mama Kessie's warnings that she'd dismissed as paranoia, about every choice that had led her to this moment, chasing splendor without counting the cost. The price, she now understood, was everything. But she was married to a monster, bound by law and threat, and the invisible chains of a supernatural curse she didn't understand. Running seemed impossible, escape seemed hopeless, and morning would come all too soon, bringing with it another day of pretending that her life was a fairy tale instead of a waking nightmare. Liana pulled herself to her feet and walked back through the house that was her prison. In the hallway of portraits, she paused before the empty frame she now realized was waiting for her. The brass plate was already engraved. Liana Obiora, 2025. The end date was blank, waiting to be filled in when she, like all the others, finally broke under the weight of the horror she'd married into. She ran her fingers over her name, and something in her chest, some part of her that had been reaching for stars, finally shattered completely. The transformation had begun. Not into the governor's wife, but into something far worse. Something that cleaned rot from a corpse each night and smiled for cameras each day. Something that had once been a girl with dreams and was now just another ghost haunting the halls of Obiora Estate, waiting for her story to end the same way all the others had, with a portrait on the wall and no one left to remember who she'd been before the splendor consumed her. The nightly ritual became Liana's existence. Each evening at precisely midnight, Obiora would summon her to the private chamber. Each night she would take up the curved blade and scrape away the rot, remove the writhing larvae, apply the foul-smelling oils while reciting words in a language that felt wrong on her tongue. And each morning she would smile for photographers, shake hands with dignitaries, play the role of the gracious governor's wife while something inside her slowly died. The changes started subtly, a persistent tiredness that no amount of sleep could cure. Her reflection in the mirror showing someone slightly less vibrant, as if a light were dimming behind her eyes. But she pushed through, telling herself she could endure anything for Mama Kessie's safety. "You're glowing," people would say at functions, mistaking her pallor for elegance. "Marriage suits you?" If only they knew what marriage meant in Obiora Estate. 3 weeks after the first ritual, Liana noticed her hair coming out in unusual amounts, clumps of it on her pillow each morning, strands circling the shower drain like dark accusations. She began wearing elaborate head wraps to hide the thinning patches. "It's just stress," she told herself. "Just adjustment to a new life." But then her gums began bleeding when she brushed her teeth. Her nails became brittle, cracking and peeling away from the nail bed. And the smell, that horrible smell of decay, began emanating from her own body. Faint but unmistakable, as if the rot she cleaned each night was somehow seeping into her flesh. "You're absorbing it," whispered the servant girl who'd warned her that first night. They'd crossed paths in a hallway, and the girl had grabbed Liana's arm with desperate urgency. "The curse spreads through the ritual. Every time you touch him, every time you speak those words, it gets deeper into you. The others, they all looked like you do now before they disappeared." "What happened to them?" Liana asked. "Please, I need to know." They tried to run, all of them, and he. The girl's eyes filled with tears. We found things, pieces, buried in the gardens, scattered in the wild areas of the property. The police were called once, but the governor made it go away. He always makes things go away. Why are you still here? Why do you stay? Because he pays well and my family needs the money. Because refusing him means ending up like the wives. We stay silent and we survive. She released Liana's arm. But you're different. You chose this. You walked in with your eyes open to everything except the truth. The words stung because they were accurate. Liana had seen the red flags and ignored them all. She dismissed warnings, rejected genuine love, chosen splendor over substance. And now she was paying a price that grew heavier each day. By the second month, Liana could no longer hide the deterioration. Her skin had taken on a grayish tinge that no amount of makeup could fully conceal. Her breath carried a foulness that mouthwash barely masked. She'd lost weight despite eating regularly, her clothes hanging loose on a frame that seemed to be consuming itself from within. You look terrible, Obiora observed one evening, his tone clinical rather than concerned. We may need to accelerate the timeline. What timeline? Liana's voice came out raspy, her throat perpetually raw. The timeline for your transition. He studied her the way a scientist might study a failing experiment. The curse consumes some faster than others. I'd hoped you'd last longer. You started so vibrant, but your body is rejecting the ritual, fighting it. Good. Maybe it will kill me and end this nightmare. It won't kill you, not directly. He reached out and touched her face, his fingers cold against her skin. But it will hollow you out, make you a shell. And when there's nothing left worth maintaining, when you've become too damaged to present in public, that's when your portrait gets its end date. Why? The question burst from Liana with all the anguish she'd been suppressing. Why do you do this? Why not just find willing participants? Why trap women in marriage? Because the ritual requires sacrifice. It requires pain and unwillingness. Voluntary participation weakens the magic. The curse feeds on despair, on trapped spirits, on the slow destruction of hope. He smiled that terrible smile. You chose splendor, Liana. I'm simply showing you what splendor costs when you're willing to pay any price for it. That night, during the ritual, something inside Liana finally broke completely. As she scraped the rotting flesh, as the larvae fell writhing to the floor, she began to laugh, a high, desperate sound that echoed off the stone walls. Obiora turned sharply. Control yourself. But Liana couldn't stop. The laughter turned to sobs, great heaving cries that shook her entire body. The blade fell from her nerveless fingers, clattering against the floor. I can't do this anymore, she gasped. I can't. Kill me if you want. Hurt Mama Casey. I don't care anymore. I just want this to end. Obiora's expression darkened. You'll do as you're told. No. The word came out stronger than Liana felt. No, I won't. You can't make me. You can threaten and hurt and destroy, but you can't make me participate in this horror anymore. For a moment, genuine surprise crossed Obiora's face. Then rage, pure and cold, twisted his features into something inhuman. He grabbed Liana by the throat, lifting her off her feet with impossible strength. You think you have a choice? You think defiance means anything? His grip tightened, cutting off her air. I've broken stronger women than you. I've made them beg to continue the ritual just to avoid worse tortures. You will obey or you will suffer. Liana clawed at his hands, her vision darkening, her lungs screaming for air. This was it. This was how it ended. Not as a governor's wife, but as another victim. Another portrait, another cautionary tale no one would ever hear. Then, abruptly, Obiora released her. Liana collapsed to the floor, gasping and coughing. "Actually, you're right," he said, his voice eerily calm again. "You can't continue the ritual effectively if you're resistant. The magic requires a certain level of compliance, however unwilling. So we'll try something else." He moved to a locked cabinet Liana had never seen, opened and removed a vial of dark liquid. "This is a different approach. More direct. You'll drink this, and it will bind you to me completely. No more choice. No more resistance. Just obedience. What is it? Does it matter? Either you drink it willingly or I'll force it down your throat. The result is the same." Liana looked at the vial, at Obiora's expectant face, at the door that might as well have been 1,000 miles away, and she realized that she truly had no way out. Even defiance was futile. The trap had closed completely. But before Obiora could force the issue, Liana's vision blurred. The room tilted sideways. She tried to stand and found her legs wouldn't support her weight. "What's happening?" she managed to whisper. "Ah." Obiora knelt beside her, studying her face with professional interest. "The curse has progressed faster than I anticipated. Your body is shutting down. Unfortunate. I had hoped for at least another month." Liana's consciousness began to flicker like a candle in wind. The last thing she heard before darkness claimed her was Obiora calling for the servants, his voice irritated rather than concerned. "Get Dr. Chijioke. Tell him it's urgent, and prepare the car. We'll need to take her to the hospital before she dies here and creates complications." When Liana woke, she was in a hospital room. Harsh fluorescent lights, the smell of antiseptic, machines beeping steadily. For a moment she thought perhaps the entire nightmare had been a fever dream. But then she tried to move and felt the weakness in her limbs. Saw her arms covered in bruises, noticed how thin her wrists had become. "You're awake." "Good." A man in a white coat stood at the foot of her bed, older, with kind eyes and an air of weariness that suggested he'd seen too much suffering. "I'm Dr. Madu Chijioke," he said. "You've been unconscious for 2 days. Your husband brought you in with acute organ stress and severe malnutrition, though you've clearly been eating. Very concerning." "Where is he?" Liana's voice came out as barely a croak. "He left after admitting you. Said he had urgent state business." Dr. Chijioke moved closer, lowering his voice. "But he also left very specific instructions about your treatment, instructions that raised some red flags for me." "What kind of instructions?" "He wants you stabilized just enough to go home. No thorough investigation into what's causing your condition, no police involvement. Essentially, he wants me to patch you up so you can continue whatever's destroying you." The doctor's eyes held deep concern. "I've seen cases like yours before, though not often. The symptoms suggest exposure to something toxic, but more than that, there's a spiritual component, a darkness that modern medicine can't fully explain." "You believe in curses?" Liana asked. "I believe there are things in this world that science hasn't catalogued, and I believe you're dying, Mrs. Obiora. Whatever's happening to you will kill you within weeks if it continues." Tears leaked from Liana's eyes. "I can't stop it. He won't let me, and if I try to run or tell anyone, he'll hurt my mother." Dr. Chijioke was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. "Tell me everything," he said softly, "from the beginning." And Liana did. She told him about the wound, the rituals, the previous wives, the threats. She expected disbelief, dismissal, perhaps even calls for psychiatric evaluation. Instead, Dr. Chijioke listened with the attention of someone who understood exactly what she was describing. "There are old practices," he said when she finished. "Ancient rituals that blur the line between medicine and magic. What you're describing sounds like a variation of the Ezi Indu, the preservation of life curse. It keeps someone alive past their natural death, but requires regular sacrifice. Usually animal, but the darkest versions require human essence. Can it be stopped? The curse ends when the host dies. But it's self-perpetuating. The magic keeps him alive. Breaking it would require destroying the source, and he's made himself the source. So I'm trapped. Fresh tears came now. I'm going to die in that house like all the others. Maybe not. Dr. Chijioke leaned forward. The curse feeds on your vitality because you're bound to him through marriage and ritual. But if you could break that connection, truly break it, the curse would have no anchor in you. It would revert entirely to him. How do I break it? You'd need to refuse participation completely. No rituals, no matter the threat. The curse requires your active involvement to function. Without it, it stays contained in him, but the magic will fight back, will make him desperate, will... The door opened and Obiora entered. His expression pleasant, but his eyes cold as he took in the scene. Dr. Chijioke, thank you for your care. I've come to take my wife home. She's not well enough to leave, the doctor said, standing. She needs at least another week of observation. I have excellent care at home, better than what a public hospital can provide. Obiora moved to Liana's bedside, his hand possessive on her shoulder. Isn't that right, darling? You want to come home. Liana looked between the doctor's worried face and Obiora's expectant one. She thought about the chamber, the blade, the rot. She thought about Mama Casey's warnings, Tari's desperate pleas. She thought about all the choices that had led her to this moment. No, she whispered. Obiora's grip tightened painfully. What did you say? I said no. Liana's voice grew stronger despite her weakness. I'm not going back. I'm not doing the rituals anymore. I'd rather die here than spend another night in that house. You don't mean that. You're confused, medicated. I'm clearer than I've been in months. Liana turned to Dr. Chijioke. Call the police. Tell them everything I told you. I don't care if they believe it or not. I'm not leaving with him. Obiora's face transformed, the pleasant mask shattering to reveal the monster beneath. You stupid girl. You'll condemn your mother. My mother would rather die than see me continue like this. I know that now. Dr. Chijioke, I insist you release my wife into my care immediately. I'm afraid I can't do that. The doctor moved to the door, blocking it. Not when she's explicitly refusing to leave. That's her legal right. For a moment, Liana thought Obiora might attack them both. Violence radiated from him, his hands clenching and unclenching. But they were in a hospital, surrounded by witnesses. He couldn't make them disappear as easily as he'd disappeared the others. You've made a terrible mistake, Obiora said, his voice dropping to something cold and final. Both of you. Terrible. He turned and strode from the room. Dr. Chijioke immediately locked the door and picked up the phone. I'm calling for security, and yes, we'll contact the police, though I'm not sure how much they'll be able to do immediately. He looked at Liana with deep concern. But you've taken the first step. You've broken the binding by refusing to participate. Now we see what happens. What happened was nothing for 3 days. Liana remained in the hospital, growing slightly stronger each day as the curse's immediate effects began to recede without the nightly rituals to reinforce them. Police came, took her statement, looked skeptical but promised to investigate. Dr. Chijioke arranged for her mother to be brought to the hospital under protection. When Mama Casey saw her daughter, thin, gray, barely recognizable, she wept. My child, my baby, what has he done to you? You were right, Mama. Liana held her mother's hand weakly. About everything. I'm so sorry I didn't listen. Hush now. We'll get through this. You're safe now. But Liana wasn't sure about that. Obiora had gone silent, which somehow felt more terrifying than threats. The police investigation seemed to be hitting walls at every turn. Evidence disappeared, witnesses recanted, powerful people intervened. The governor's influence was absolute. On the fourth day, shocking news spread through the hospital like wildfire. Governor Nkem Obiora had been found dead in his estate. No clear cause. The body was already being prepared for immediate burial, no autopsy, no public viewing. Rumors flew: heart attack, stroke, poison, curse. Dr. Chijioke came to Liana's room with the newspaper. "It's over," he said quietly. "The curse has consumed him. Without someone to maintain the ritual, the rot progressed unchecked. He died from the same decay he'd been inflicting on others for years." Liana stared at the headline, feeling nothing. Not relief, not triumph, not even satisfaction. Just emptiness where terror had lived for so long. "The others," she whispered. "The other wives. Did he kill them or did the curse? Does it matter?" "He's responsible either way." Dr. Chijioke sat beside her. "The police are investigating the estate now that he can't block them. They've found things, evidence, enough to confirm some of your story, though they'll likely attribute it to mundane evil rather than supernatural causes. Either way, the truth is coming out." "And Tari?" Liana asked suddenly. "Is there any way to find Tari Adebayo?" "I can try. Why?" "Because I owe him an apology that can never be enough. Because he tried to save me and I destroyed him for it. Because—" her voice broke. "Because he was real when everything else was a lie." Dr. Chijioke found Tari 3 days later. When he appeared in Liana's hospital room doorway, she almost didn't recognize him. He looked older, worn down by grief and hard work. But his eyes, those eyes still held some warmth, though it was tempered now by caution. Liana. Her name on his lips was a complicated thing, pain and relief and anger all mixed together. "You came." She could barely speak past the lump in her throat. "After everything I said, everything I did, you came. I heard what happened, about Obiora, about you in the hospital." Tari moved closer slowly, as if approaching something fragile. "Are you okay?" "No, but I'm alive, which is more than I deserve." "Don't say that." "Why not? It's true." Tears streamed down Liana's face. "You tried to warn me. You loved me honestly, asked for nothing but a chance to build something real, and I threw it back in your face because I wanted gold and glamour and status. I wanted to matter, and look what it cost me." Tari pulled up a chair, sitting down with a heavy sigh. "I was angry for a long time. Hurt. I thought about you every day and hated myself for not being enough. You were always enough. More than enough. I was the one who wasn't enough, wasn't wise enough, grateful enough, smart enough to see what I had. Liana, let me finish. Please." She gripped his hand weakly. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything from you, but I need you to know that you were right about everything. About me, about him, about what would happen if I chose splendor over substance. And I need you to know that if I could go back, if I could undo every choice that led me away from you, I would do it in a heartbeat." Tari was quiet for a long time, his thumb absently stroking the back of her hand, a gesture so familiar it made Liana's heart ache. "I can't pretend the past didn't happen," he said finally. "I can't say everything is forgiven and we go back to how things were. That girl I loved, she's not the same person sitting here now. I know, but maybe that's okay. Maybe the person you've become, scarred and broken and wise to things I hope I never have to understand, maybe she's someone I could learn to know. Not as we were, but as something new, something honest." Fresh tears came, but these felt different, cleaner somehow. You would do that, after everything? I'm not promising forever. I'm not promising love like before, but I'm promising that I'll be here while you heal, as a friend, if nothing else, because despite everything, I can't just walk away from you again. I don't deserve that. Probably not. A ghost of his old smile appeared. But maybe deserving isn't the point. Maybe the point is choosing to be decent even when it's hard, even when the person doesn't deserve it. That's what real love looks like, I think. Not the grand gestures and expensive gifts, just showing up when it matters. Liana's recovery was slow. 3 more weeks in the hospital while her body fought to reclaim itself from the curse's influence. Her hair began to grow back, though it came in with threads of premature gray. The smell of decay gradually faded. Her skin lost its grayish pallor. But the memories, those would never fully heal. The investigation into Obiora's estate uncovered horrors that made national news. Remains found in the gardens, evidence of multiple victims, financial crimes and corruption that unraveled his entire political network. The more they dug, the more monstrous he appeared. Liana gave statements, testified when required, and tried not to think about how close she'd come to being just another buried secret. Mama Casey never left her side during the recovery. She slept in a chair beside Liana's bed, held her daughter through nightmares, whispered prayers and words of comfort. "You're going to be okay," Mama Cassie said one evening as Liana woke screaming from another dream of the ritual chamber. "Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. You're stronger than this darkness." "How can you say that? I was so weak, so stupid." "You were human. You made mistakes that had terrible consequences, yes. But when it mattered most, when you had to choose between survival and dignity, you chose dignity. You refused to participate in evil even when it would have been easier. That takes strength. Child, I don't feel strong." Strength isn't about feeling strong. It's about continuing even when you feel broken. When Liana was finally discharged, she refused to return to Ouzo River. Too many memories, too many ghosts of who she'd been. Instead, she found a small apartment in a different town, modest but clean, and began the work of rebuilding a life from ashes. Tari visited weekly, true to his word. They talked about small things, his workshop finally opening, her plans to return to school eventually, the weather, the neighborhood. Nothing heavy, nothing demanding. Just presence, just showing up. 6 months after leaving the hospital, Liana stood before a mirror and hardly recognized the woman looking back. She was thinner than before, her eyes older, her smile more cautious. But she was real. No masks, no performances, no pretending to be something she wasn't. Mama Casey stood beside her, adjusting the collar of Liana's simple dress. "You look beautiful," her mother said. "I look tired." Sometimes those are the same thing. Beauty earned through suffering has a different quality than beauty that's just given. "I don't want to be beautiful anymore, Mama. I just want to be whole." "Then be whole." Mama Cassie kissed her daughter's forehead. "Wholeness is a better goal anyway." They were preparing for a small gathering, just a few people, nothing fancy. Tari would be there, some of Mama Casey's church friends, Dr. Chijioke, who had become a trusted friend. Nothing like the glittering parties of Liana's brief time as the governor's wife. Just simple, honest connection. As the evening unfolded, Liana found herself laughing genuinely for the first time in nearly a year. The sound startled her, then filled her with something like hope. Maybe wholeness wasn't a destination, but a practice. Maybe healing wasn't about forgetting, but about integrating the pain into something stronger. Late in the evening, Tari found her on the small balcony, looking out at the quiet street below. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, leaning against the railing beside her. I was thinking about choices, about how every decision leads somewhere, and we can't always see where until we've arrived. Heavy thoughts for a party. I'm full of heavy thoughts these days. She glanced at him, this man who had every right to hate her, but chose compassion instead. Tari, can I ask you something? Always. Do you think people can really change? Or do we just become more of what we always were? He considered the question seriously. I think we're always changing whether we mean to or not. Life chips away at us, adds to us, reshapes us. The question isn't whether we change, but whether we let those changes make us bitter or better. Which one am I becoming? I think you're becoming someone who understands that splendor isn't worth the soul. That's better, in my book. Liana nodded slowly. Not every treasure is worth the price. Some luxuries cost everything. Exactly. They stood in companionable silence, watching the ordinary street below, with its ordinary people living ordinary lives. Lives that suddenly seemed precious beyond measure. Thank you, Liana said quietly. For what? For not giving up on me. For showing me what real goodness looks like. For being you when I was too blind to appreciate it. Tari smiled, that genuine smile she'd once taken for granted. We all get lost sometimes. The lucky ones find their way home. The really lucky ones have people waiting when they do. Inside, Mama Kessie called for them to join the others. Liana took one last look at the night sky, at the stars that had once seemed like promises of glory, and now just seemed like distant lights, beautiful but unreachable, and that was okay. She didn't need to reach the stars anymore. She just needed to stand on solid ground. As she turned to go inside, Liana caught her reflection in the glass door. Not the glamorous woman in designer clothes who'd posed for society photographs. Not the broken victim consumed by supernatural evil. Just herself, scarred, wiser, still learning how to live with the weight of her mistakes. It wasn't the life she dreamed of in that cramped apartment in Ouzo River, staring at her reflection and yearning for more. But it was real. It was honest. It was hers in a way the splendor never had been, and that, she was learning, was worth everything. The final truth settled over Liana like a benediction. Some prices are too high, no matter how beautiful the purchase. Some doors should stay closed, no matter how tempting the view beyond. And some lessons can only be learned through pain so profound it reshapes the soul. She'd paid the price of splendor and barely survived. But she had survived. And in that survival, in that hard-won wisdom, she'd found something more valuable than any treasure Obiora could have offered. She'd found herself again. Not the naive girl who'd chased gold, and not the broken woman who'd cleaned rot from a corpse, but someone new, someone who understood that peace was worth more than power, that authenticity was more precious than acclaim, that love, freely given, outweighed luxury, coerced. As Liana rejoined the simple gathering in her modest apartment, surrounded by people who saw her, truly saw her, and chose to stay anyway, she felt something she hadn't experienced since before meeting Governor Obiora. She felt free. The price had been paid, the curse had been broken. And though the scars would never fully fade, she was finally, truly alive again. Not in splendor, but in truth. And truth, she'd learned, was the only treasure worth keeping. If this story gripped you, if it made you think twice about the price of your ambitions, then subscribe to this channel for more tales that challenge, horrify, and ultimately enlighten. Drop a comment below about which moment hit you hardest. Was it the discovery, the ritual, or the redemption? And hit that like button if you believe some treasures truly do cost the soul. Remember, not all that glitters is gold, and not every splendor is worth the sacrifice. Stay wise, stay grounded, and I'll see you in the next story.